To the Point with Michael Williams.
9 days to go, and the candidates in one of the hottest congressional races make their final pitches to win voters. Good morning. It is a congressional district the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has targeted as one they can pick up in November. And the candidate they're backing is former state legislator and West Palm Beach Mayor, Democrat Lois Frankel. She joins us today as we focus on Congressional District 22 that includes parts of Palm Beach and Broward counties, about 57% of the district in Palm Beach County, about 40-some-odd% in Broward County. A Democratic tilt to the district, so that has to give you hope for your candidacy. What's your closing argument for election 9 days out?
Well, my closing argument is this. We need to face our economic issues of lowering the deficit, but also, most importantly, getting people back to work. I want to do it with innovation, with education, with tax breaks for companies that keep jobs here. And we've got to secure Medicare, and I want to do it by not cutting benefits, but by cutting waste and fraud and abuse, and by changing the way that we deliver health care. And I reject this risky voucher program that really puts our seniors at the mercy of private insurance.
Let's take, you talked about overarching argument. Let's take it one by one. Medicare, some real differences there between you and your opponent, who we will have later in our broadcast, Mr. Hasner. Talk about your view on Medicare. You say you reject this idea of a voucher, would not affect seniors now, perhaps not even affecting seniors for another 10 years or so. Republicans argue we have to do something about Medicare or it will go broke.
Well, first of all, their plan does affect seniors right now, because Mr. Hasner would immediately repeal the Affordable Care Act, which means that would be raising the cost of prescription drug. But let's take a look at Medicare. My mother is 87 years old. Her health care and the health care of millions of Americans is Medicare. And if you look back 75 years ago, before we had Medicare, before we had Social Security, most of our seniors lived in poverty, and we cannot go back that way. And so for me, number one is to make sure we do not cut benefits in Medicare. But listen, there's a lot we can do. First of all, everybody knows that there is a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse, and we have to continue to aggressively reduce that. But as important is, we've got to look at a different way to deliver health care in this country, focusing on prevention, focusing on outcome, and not incentivizing doctors for just over-testing and fee-for-service. And I think there's a lot we can do, because, listen, by the time someone is, if you're 75 years old, you have breast cancer, or you're an 85-year-old man and you need a hip replacement, you can't tell those folks, I'm sorry, we don't have enough to pay for you. Go out and get a job.
The Palm Beach Post, in a recent editorial, said no endorsement in U.S. House District 22, saying in part, neither Ms. Frankel, the Democrat, nor Mr. Hasner, the Republican, offer serious proposals to control the deficit and reform Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Your response?
Well, I respectfully disagree. And you know what? I am talking to people every day, people who are on Medicare. I'm talking to a lot of the providers. First of all, the Affordable Health Care Act that I support now extends the life of Medicare another 8 years. Gives a lot of time.
Some argue even a bit longer. The president argues till 2024.
2024. I meant 8 years more than 2016.
Oh, okay.
To 2024. And here's what we have to do during that period of time. We got to continue to root out the fraud, waste, and abuse, and more importantly, look for ways to lower the cost of health care by focusing on prevention. Let me give you a good example. Right here in Palm Beach County, there's a program going on now called Triple Aim that's going to be aimed at folks who are likely to develop diabetes, or maybe in early stages of diabetes. If you put someone with diabetes on a healthy diet, exercise, with routine medical checkups, you make sure they get to the doctor, and you take care of diabetes that way, and not wait until they're on insulin shock, they're at the hospital door, they're in renal, kidney failure, getting a limb amputated, you're going to reduce the cost of that care by 20 to 30%. I talked to one of the leading cardiologists in the country the other day, and I said to him, tell me what is the best way to lower the cost of heart disease, You know what he said? He said, get into the public schools right now and teach kids how to eat.
Mayor, before we move to some other issues on which you both are quite divergent, and I do want to touch on them, one final note. Leading business executives got together just this week. The New York Times reported on this. So listen, we want Republicans and Democrats to come together. We don't want any more brinkmanship going on. And they said, listen, and this is one quote from one of the leading business executives, said, there are very conservative Republicans in the House who say, I'd agree to a revenue increase if there was significant entitlement reform. Then you run into Democrats who say there won't be any entitlement reform until there are revenue increases. Business leaders say, we realize it's the only way to fix the deficit. Would you, if elected, agree to a grand bargain that if it included revenue increases, would also include entitlement reform, which will mean tightening the belt on Medicare, perhaps some form of means testing or other cuts down the road?
Well, here's what I agree to. First of all, I think we need to have a balanced approach. Absolutely. We need not do anything right now to jump over that fiscal cliff. I mean, because we cannot get back into the recession. Here's what I'm going to say it again. Yes, do I think there are people at the top who can maybe pay a little bit more? Do I think
for Medicare?
No, for taxes. Taxes. Do I think that we should close loopholes? Do I think maybe we can even lower corporate taxes and then cut loopholes? I don't agree on raising taxes for the middle class. And in terms of entitlement reform, yes, I believe entitlement reform the way I just explained it. We need to go after fraud, waste, and abuse, and we need to look for more efficient ways to deliver health care. And we can do that. And we have these accountable care organizations that are going to forming now, and so that health care providers are going to provide health care in a different way, looking at a patient and keeping them healthy rather than paying doctors just to treat a patient after they get sick and sicker.
Let's move on to another topic, immigration. You support the DREAM Act. Your opponent has said he does not. To people on this contentious issue, explain why you support that.
Well, I mean, look at how this country was built. I mean, my grandparents came from another country. I think most people have if you look back, they have relatives who came from another country. And that's what makes this United States of America so special, is the diversity. And look at Palm Beach County, look at our diversity. And look, if somebody is going to go to college or they're going to go into the military, and they have gotten here, really, you're talking about young people who are really...
whose parents were undocumented, but
parents
the
were undocumented, so they, I say no fault of their own, but really, they just happen to be here, and they want to go to college, and they want to serve in the military. Yes, I think we should give them a legal status to be here, absolutely. Talk
about the contrast on social issues, including abortion.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Well, huge differences here. You look, Mr. Hasner has said that he believes Roe v. Wade is a mistake. He even voted for, I think, one of the most outrageous restrictions on a woman that I've ever heard. He's voted to force women, even women who are raped, if they want to have access to terminate their pregnancy, he wants to force them to have these invasive vaginal ultrasounds, which I think is just outrageous. I trust women to make their own personal health care decisions. He wants to defund Medicare, Planned Parenthood. To me, Planned Parenthood, look, Planned Parenthood is not about abortion. Planned Parenthood saves the lives of millions of Americans because they do health care screenings, especially cancer and for other diseases.
One final point that he may raise, and I want to raise it to you before we speak to him. He said he's not sure that you have the demeanor for the kind of bipartisanship that may be needed in Congress. You've heard this. You've heard this before. He said that you have used scare tactics in Medicare, that at times you were contentious as mayor, and you've admitted yourself, you were quoted, saying, well, I'm not always as diplomatic as I could be. Talk about that critique from your opponent.
Well, first of all, let's remember who's making this critique. Adam Hasner was called, has bragged that Marco Rubio called him, Adam Hasner, the most partisan politician in the state. So is that the pot calling, what is that, the pot calling the kettle black? Here's the point, is this. My record speaks for itself. In the state legislature, I crossed party lines. I worked with the Republican women to force insurance companies to cover mammograms. Here as mayor, this was a nonpartisan role for 8 years. Was a roll-up-your-sleeves, solve problem. And look at, if you remember West Palm Beach, I don't think you were here 10 years ago in West Palm Beach.
South Florida, Miami, West Palm for 30 years, yeah.
But I think, people who are watching, they remember West Palm Beach 10 years ago.
As you took over the mayorship.
Right. Yeah. A lot of crime, a lot of malaise. The road construction had paralyzed this city. Businesses were leaving. You know what we did? Working with business leaders, our neighborhood activists, political leaders, we got together. We identified our problems. We made some strategic investments in infrastructure. And in the worst recession, scores of businesses moved into West Palm Beach. And this is really a great place to be. And we balanced the budget. I think it's a very good example of how government working with the community can get things done.
In our closing minute, before we'll speak to your opponent after the break, your final thoughts, and what do you say to constituents who look at Congress, which has historically low approval ratings, and say, you know what, is anybody going to look us in the eye and say, we got to make the tough decisions on taxes, on revenue, and on entitlement reform and spending cuts, without which the budget will not be balanced, and say we get the same old, same old? How do you convince them you're different?
Well, listen, I think most people who know me knows that I know how to make a tough decision. You know what? After a stint in the legislature where I learned to cross party lines when necessary and stand up for what was right without burning bridges, Mayor worked in a nonpartisan role as a mother of a United States Marine War veteran who I saw him go and come back from 2 wars. So I know how those kind of war and peace decisions affect families. I think that kind of experience, I have a roll up your sleeves attitude. I want to go up to Washington, D.C. I'm willing to work with anyone to get this job done.
Mayor Frankel, thank you very much. 9 days to go. We'll certainly be seeing you on election night, and I'm certain before that. Thanks for taking time to join us on To The Point.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
And back in a moment, we will be talking to her opponent in the race for District 22, Adam Hasner. Please stay with us. Congressional District 22, one of the hottest races around, covering parts of Palm Beach and Broward counties, is Adam Hasner, a former state legislator. Sir, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
I'll begin where I did with your opponent, Mayor Frankel. Your closing argument for election.
Well, I think this is a tipping point moment for our country. And I think one thing we know is every time America's been challenged, there's been a generation that's answered the call. And right now, we need to get America's fiscal house in order. We need to responsibly reduce spending. And we need to get America's economy going again. We need to have the right policies to get people back to work and get America's economy moving again. And I've laid out very specific policies on what we need to do to get revenues more aligned with expenses and what we need to do to get small businesses hiring and investing and bringing on new employees in the future. And I think that's the biggest issue to put America back on the right track.
How do we align, and doesn't it mean massive entitlement reform? And as business executives, and I brought this up to the mayor, said just yesterday in a meeting, major business executives around the country gathered, said, listen, if we're going to get all of that in line, as you just described, we have to look at a combination of revenue increases, possibly tax increases, certainly broadening the tax code, and entitlement reform and cuts. And they said Republicans and Democrats together got to come off the dime. Are you willing to do that? And if so, how?
Well, here's something that I'm talking about that my opponent won't talk about. I believe that both political parties got us into the fiscal mess that we're in. And
how did Republicans get us in?
Republicans helped to increase the deficits and the debt while George Bush was president, and while they were in control of Congress, Democrats did it too. But this election isn't about Republicans or Democrats. This election is about math. And it's about what the numbers mean for the residents of our community. It's what it means for small jobs and what it means for small business owners. It's what it means for your health security and your retirement and for your children's education and your children's future. And I've been laying out those types of reforms that you're referencing about what we need to do to get our economy moving again. And I think that we do need people working together. And I have a strong record of bipartisan accomplishments during my time in the state legislature on big issues. And so I've proven that during my time in Tallahassee, and I think that is what it's going to take in Washington.
Are you willing to accept tax increases, revenue increases in exchange for entitlement reform? Would you, if elected to Congress, accept that grand bargain? Because a lot of Republicans say, no way, no how, ever to any tax increases. Business executives are saying, we know that won't fly. Are you saying you're willing to accept that for entitlement reform, some form of broadening the tax code or tax increases if it came to that?
Well, I'm not afraid of more federal revenue coming into the federal government. Right now,
in terms of tax increases?
Right now, revenues are at historical low averages. They're 16% as opposed to 18%. We need to grow the economy. We need to get people back to work. I don't believe that you do that by raising marginal income tax rates or tax rates on income or dividends. I believe we need to get small businesses hiring again, and that means to lower rates and broaden the base, eliminate a lot of those loopholes and exemptions, and get people back to work.
Talk about Medicare.
Yeah.
One of the biggest drivers of federal debt, Medicare, Social Security. The defense budget is something that's being wrangled over in Congress. We're looking at a fiscal cliff that could mean cuts to many programs, including the defense budget, including domestic programs. Talk about Medicare. Big differences there. Mayor Frankel says, no way do I support a voucher program. You support some variation of the Paul Ryan plan that says 10 years out or more, that we want to voucherize or give seniors other options, future seniors. Why is that the way to go when a lot of seniors wouldn't be able to, they argue, be able to afford it? Democrats say you're going to put a lot of people in the poorhouse.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunate that Ms. Frankel has been trying to win this election with scare tactics and false attacks. The bipartisan plan that I support, experts on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, came together and they recognize what I understand. Medicare is going insolvent. In the next 10 years, the Medicare Trust Fund is going to be bankrupt.
How do we fix it?
Well, you fix it by doing this. First, you make sure that anyone 55 and over, that there's absolutely no changes to their benefits whatsoever. My mom and the millions like her who rely on Medicare. But then you have to recognize that the best way to do it is to use the type of premium support program very similar to what members of Congress have. And I hear it all the time and I talk about it all the time, that Congress should live by the same set of rules as everybody else. But this is a plan that would put that would protect anyone 55 and over. It will save the program for seniors today and it will strengthen it for future generations.
What if I can't afford that premium support?
And that's the part that I think has, again, the false attacks. For people who are ill, for people who are less affluent, they would actually receive more premium support, so there would be no money out of their pocket. The wealthy would actually receive a lower premium support. And so the attack ads and the false attacks are falling short simply because I think people recognize the math and the fact that Medicare is not going to be there. If the quickest way to end Medicare as we know it is by doing nothing, and that's why we have to make this happen within the next 10 years.
Representative Hasner, I want to put the same question to you as the Republican in Congressional District 22 as I did to the Democrat, Lois Frankel. The Palm Beach Post recently said in an editorial, no endorsement, and they said, and I'm going to put the same quote to you, neither Ms. Frankel, the Democrat, nor Mr. Hasner, the Republican, offer serious proposals to control the deficit and reform Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Your response?
Well, my response is that the Sun Sentinel editorial board had a lot different view when they endorsed me, as well as groups that are the pro-jobs and pro-business organizations like the U.S. Chamber and NFIB. And it's not just about those groups. I have a wide spectrum of support from Democrats, independents, as well as Republicans. And I have been talking about specifics to reduce spending responsibly, make Congress live, or make Washington live within its means. You know it and I know it and the viewers know it. You can't keep spending $1 trillion a year more than you're bringing in and pile up $16 trillion debt right now that we have. It's stifling economic growth and job creation, and our debt's become our greatest national security threat. And so I've talked about that balanced approach of getting America's fiscal house in order and getting our economy moving again with pro-growth policies.
I want to talk about immigration. You have opposed the DREAM Act in the past. Lois Frankel has said she supports it, talking about children of undocumented immigrants who've come here, been raised in America, giving them a path to citizenhood. Talk about your feelings on that issue.
Well, first and foremost, I think we have to recognize that we're a country of immigrants. But I support reforming our legal immigration system first. This has to be a sequential solution. You can't run to the finish line and try to fix those problems first. You have to secure our borders, and you have to fix the broken legal immigration system where people who come here legally overstay their welcome. The next thing that you need to do is address the issue of the guest worker programs and dealing with the workforce issues, particularly here in Florida. And then you can begin to start solving the problem of the issue of those who came here by no fault of their own. And
why not solve that now? Because you just hit on it. Because they came here through no fault of their own.
Because if you don't solve it now, there's not going to be any political will to solve the most foundational and fundamental problem. That's why I'd like to see this solved very sequentially and do it in a way that gets people back into the workforce and makes our legal immigration system work properly, so we're bringing in the types of people into our country that we want here and the people who are going to have a positive impact on our society and on our economy.
Social issues. She is pro-choice. you're pro-life. She says he's gone so far, as we interviewed her a short while ago, so far as to say that women, even women who have been subjected to rape, should be forced to undergo an ultrasound. She says we're diametrically opposed on this issue of abortion. Talk about your views.
Well, it's no secret that I'm pro-life with exceptions for rape and incest and the life of the mother. That's a distortion of what the law actually does. But the reality is it's a distraction from the fact that she has not put out any solutions on the two big issues for our economy and creating jobs and responsibly reducing spending. And it's just more of the same types of attacks and negative ads that she's been hitting me on for to try to avoid talking about her record as mayor of West Palm Beach and the fact that I've been talking about specific solutions to the big problems that face us. And Michael, I got to tell you, I have a lot of people who support me who don't agree with me on every issue. And I think that speaks volumes, because you don't have to agree with me on every issue. And I have people who are working on our campaign, who have yard signs in their yard and bumper stickers on their car, who may not see it the same way on every issue. But on the issues where we do agree, on the issues that matter most to them, on getting America's fiscal house in order and getting our economy moving again, they know that comparing me to Lois Frankel, that I'm the better candidate to go to Washington.
Those are broad themes, but many people say of Democrats and Republicans, and many nonpartisan economists will argue, it's easy to talk broadly about getting our spending house in order and everything else. They said, believe the candidate who looks people in the eye via to the point or any other format, says, listen, at the end of the day, we're going to need revenue increases, whether that's a broadly changed tax code or tax increases, and we're going to have to cut entitlements. They said, believe that candidate. Are you willing to say it that simply? We need to cut entitlements?
This is an issue of math, Michael.
We need to cut entitlements?
62% of the federal budget is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security entitlements. We have to bend the cost curve. We have to lower health care costs, and we have to bring down the cost of those programs in the future.
And you're willing to also concede, as business leaders have said, that the other side of the house
we're going to reform our tax code, and we're going to grow our economy, and more tax revenue, as I said, is going to come in. We're going to get tax revenues back up to historical averages,
but
and we're
no
going to reduce spending.
Taxes.
Well, I don't believe that raising tax rates is the best way to get our economy stronger, and that should be goal number one.
Final closing thought for you. I said to her very briefly, most people, when you poll Americans, say they don't have a lot of faith in Congress. How's it going to be any different with an Adam Hasner there?
Well, I don't believe that Congress lives by the same set of rules as everybody else. And unlike my opponent, I've committed to personally term limiting myself after 8 years. I've said I will never accept a pay raise as a member of Congress. I don't think people get to vote their own pay raises. I said I will refuse a congressional pension. I think it's outrageous that members of Congress can qualify for full retirement benefits after only 5 years of service. We don't have that in the real world. And then I believe in one thing: you need to do your job. Washington hasn't passed a budget now in 3 years. I say something very simple. When Washington doesn't pass a budget, they shouldn't be paid. It's called no budget, no pay. It's that simple. And I think that I'm going to go up there and help to change that culture in Washington to make sure that members of Congress live by the same rules as everybody else.
Republican Adam Hasner, thank you for taking time to join us on To the Point. We appreciate it. And we'll see how the election unfolds in just 9 more days. Coming up, we're taking time to explain amendment questions on the ballot this year. Stay with us. I've been receiving of late quite a few questions on Facebook about the constitutional amendment questions on the ballot in Florida this year. Many of you asking for some basic information. So to help you out, we've asked our political analyst, Robert Watson, to break them down for us. He's finally gotten some sleep. The head of the American Studies program at Lynn University. Again, congratulations on the great job you and everybody at Lynn did on the recent presidential debate, on a map in a way that people will remember for decades to come.
Sure was exciting, and congratulations on the outstanding coverage. WPTV was everywhere. So.
Well, now that we've patted each other on the back, and well-deserved in Lynn's case, take us through, start running us through. We're going to do 6 of the amendments today, then we're going to do the final 5. There are 11 on the ballot. Yes. And Robert, kind of you to come in, start breaking them down for us.
Well, first off, let me say this. The Florida Constitution is a lot longer than the U.S. Constitution, one of the longer state constitutions, significantly so, and it's about to get a bit longer with these 11 amendments. Now, not only would the constitutions perhaps get longer, but the voting lines may get longer. Why? There's 11 amendments. This ballot will be several pages long. It's one of the longest ballots in Florida history, one of the longest ballots in the country, and many of the amendments are written in legalese or legislative speak, so they're complicated. Here's what I'm encouraging viewers to do. If you vote on Election Day, or if you even go in early voting, take a cheat sheet along. Print off from the Supervisors of Elections office or from WPTV's
Study
website.
up before you go in.
Study up. It's perfectly legal to bring a piece of paper in and write down all the yes and no's before.
Okay.
I'm estimating it'll take about 20 minutes to get through the ballot. There's also one other quick controversy, and that is this. There's a few ways to put something on a ballot as a constitutional amendment. You can have a constitutional convention, much like we equate to the Founding Fathers back in 1787. You could have a citizen approach, where if you get 8% of all the signatures in the previous election, and you do it in several different parts of the state, you can bring it forward. But what's made this interesting, important, and controversial is all 11 were brought forward from the legislature, and several of them on straight party line voting.
Some argue that the legislature has been trying to duck its legislative responsibility on hot button issues, and with that, let's jump into the amendments.
Abortion, religious freedom, health care.
Start at the top.
So number one is health care. This was the first priority of the Republican legislature and of the governor, and it was one of the first efforts that was moved forward. Now, the health care provision, ballot amendment number one, what it was designed to do was to either prevent Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act or overturn that. Now, this U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the individual mandate component of Obamacare was constitutional. Therefore, this amendment will not overturn or stop Obamacare.
So when people see Amendment 1, it'll be asking them to do what?
It'll be asking them to vote if they want to prevent a state version here in Florida of Obamacare, much like you might say, famously or infamously, Governor Romney did in Massachusetts. Okay. So it would prevent a state version of this, but it would not overturn Obamacare. Okay. And it would also have a symbolic element, a chance for Florida voters to weigh in for or weigh in against, and you would need 60% of the vote.
Right. With all these amendments, you need 60%
of the vote. They don't pass with 51%.
Amendment 2.
Number 2 deals with disabled veterans. Here's what we have. If you are a veteran and you're over 65 and you incurred a disability in war and you were a Florida resident when you entered the military, you get property tax benefits, you get homestead exemptions. That's already been on the books. What number 2 does, it extends that. If you were not a Florida resident when you went in the military, but you have since moved to Florida, you will be eligible for additional homestead exemptions and property tax breaks.
Tax ramification questions for all Floridians implicit in this.
So it adds to that, and it's supported. This is one of the few. This went through unanimously, Democrats and Republicans. The only groups really opposing it, some local government officials are worried it could gut several million in revenues over the next few years. Number 3, it's a state government revenue cap. Here's what we have in Florida. This is already on the books. That Florida caps its total tax money and its total spending. Now, some critics are saying number 3, Constitutional Amendment 3, is not necessary because Florida has never gone over its revenue cap. What the legislature did, and this passed on party line voting, Republicans voting for it, Democrats voting against it. What this does is it refigures the state cap and lowers it. So theoretically, less taxes, less spending in Florida. It uses a new formula for inflation, population growth projections to lower that cap. The groups favoring this include Republican leaders, business groups, and the Florida Chamber of Commerce. A whole array of groups from the Fraternal Order of Police, firefighters unions, AARP, senior citizens groups, labor, school teachers are opposing it, worried that it could result in less spending throughout the state.
Because on the face, it tightens, it shrinks government.
It would.
The flip side is, if you need that revenue for the government that we all take for granted, you may not have as much of it there.
Exactly, spot on.
Amendment 4.
Number 4 is a property tax limitation. Here's what it does. There are 3 components to it. Number 1, it decreases from 10% down to 5% the amount of non-homestead property. So that's non-homestead, not the homestead. It decreases from 10 to 5% the amount of non-homestead property that you can pay per year in terms of taxes. So it decreases that. Number 2, the legislature is now empowered, if this passes, the state legislature is empowered to prohibit or limit increases in property tax values. So let's say property values are declining, taxes are going up, the legislature could come in and cut that down. And third and finally, it offers an additional homestead property tax for first-time home buyers. There are already homestead tax breaks for first-time homebuyers. This provides an additional one up to 50% of the value of the property.
All of us, of course, instinctively, we want to pay less taxes, but as I'm listening to you talk about a few of these amendments, and this has been some of the criticism that the legislature's put complicated tax and spending issues before voters, things that should be the purview of the legislature. Could we end up in a California-type situation where for 30 years now, they've had voter-approved amendments that have, they now argue in California, artificially constrained the debate about how much revenue they really need?
That's exactly what critics are saying. For example, the League of Women Voters is opposing all these. They want no votes on everything. One of the main reasons why is exactly what you said, is the legislature might be abandoning its constitutional responsibility to legislate by pushing it off easily on voters to pass these measures.
And be careful what you vote for the ramifications it may have down the road.
And many of the groups opposing it, as we said earlier, police officers, firefighters, unions, school teachers, the Florida League of Cities is opposing a lot of these. The Florida County Government Association is opposing a lot of these because they're worried that if we continue to cut property taxes, continue to cut it, schools that are already underfunded could be adversely impacted.
But supporters argue we need to rein in the scope of government.
Exactly.
And this allows voters to say that's exactly what we're going to do.
And supporters are saying that there's probably no better way to rein in government than by allowing people to cast a vote in a direct democracy rather than allowing the legislature to do it, to rein in government. So that's an interesting and controversial. Number five is very controversial. This has generated national attention. I've had scholars around the country contact me saying, what's going on in Florida? What it essentially does, in short, and I'll break out the details, it allows the state legislature to have a little bit more power over the courts. So critics are automatically, in the Florida Bar Association.
So essentially the amendment would do what?
The amendment would do four things, but their concern is that the legislature would have more power than the executive or the judicial branch. Four things. Number one, the state Senate could confirm Supreme Court justices. Now, that's not controversial because that's what we do in the United States at the national level. Number two, it allows the Florida Speaker of the House to have access to more files, more documents, more information from the courts. And the courts are saying, no, wait, we don't need to be directly overseen or managed by the Speaker. Number three, the state legislature can change the court's rules, and they can do so with a simple majority, 50% plus one. In many states, if the legislature, some states the legislature has difficulty changing court rules, or if they do, they need a supermajority. This would allow the legislature in Florida to change the Supreme Court operating procedures with a simple 50% plus one. And number four, the most controversial, it divides us into two Supreme Courts, which is kind of something brand new, and there will be a Supreme Court for civil appeals and a Supreme Court for criminal appeals.
And the concern is from opponents that this is a way of trying to pack the Supreme Court by a Republican-dominated legislature. Is that a fair critique?
It is.
And one that's earned national
national attention. Almost every judicial reform group, almost every group of lawyers, almost every bar association, scholars on this have all come in against this. When Franklin Roosevelt was president, he found he couldn't push a lot of his New Deal programs through the 9 justices. He wanted to increase the size of the court to pack it. So the concern here is if you divide it into two, a civil and a criminal court, one of the things that the legislature wants to do is take the older judges who are Democrats, put them on the weaker court, take the younger judges who are Republicans and give them more power.
But supporters, to look at the flip side of that coin, argue it would make what, a more efficient? Supporters
were saying it would streamline the court. That way you should separate civil from criminal. Sure. Tends to be a backlog in cases in the judicial system. The courts are overworked, and it would allow the justices to specialize in criminal versus civil. And the sixth and final one we'll do today is very controversial. It deals with abortion. So obviously pro-choice groups are opposing this and asking to vote no, and pro-life groups are voting yes.
There's a federal prohibition on public funds.
There is. So there's the two-part requirement here. Number one is federal funding cannot be used on abortions. That's the first part of Amendment number 6. Related to that, federal funding cannot be used...
But the Hyde Amendment essentially has made that a de facto
it
matter
has.
Anyway.
But,
at the federal level, but I don't want to confuse people.
This
at the state level, it would say no state money
can be used, or federal money can be used for abortion, or secondly, for abortion-related services if your health care involves an abortion plan or reproductive plan. But the second part that is pro-choice groups concerned is 30 years ago, abortion was listed as a privacy issue in Florida. By statute. This would allow abortion to not be listed as a privacy issue, which pro-choice groups are worried that this is the first step, then it would make it possible then to outlaw abortion in its entirety in Florida if it's no longer a privacy right.
the flip side, pro-life groups are arguing as they have in years past. And we've had guests on To the Point say, listen, at the end of the day, it is a decision of such import that public money should not be part of our consideration.
And pro-life groups would argue that what better way to weigh in on abortion for or against than allowing the public to go to the ballot and let their voice be heard and their vote be counted.
Robert, and I really mean this, these amendments are so complicated, and you've done a superb job of breaking them down for us, because we get in and look at the ballot and we say, I'm going to vote for who in this race or this race, but oftentimes it's these amendments that have such a crucial impact for years to come on our lives, whether it's taxes or social policy, the makeup of the Florida Supreme Court. Huge debates, and thanks for a great public service. And we're going to do the other 5 next week. But this was one of the best breakdowns I've ever had, and I appreciate it so much. Don't go away, because we're going to ask you to weigh in on politics in just a moment.
Always happy to do that.
I know you are. That's why we've got you here. And we'll see you in just a moment. More details about all the amendments on WPTV.com, by the way. Click on the featured stories section, and we'll discuss the rest of them with Robert next week. Next, political ads. There are hundreds of political ads on television. I know you've seen so many of them and are trying to zone out on them at this point in the campaign, but we do want to focus for you on a couple of them in the congressional race between Patrick Murphy and Allen West. First, let's take a look at the one by Allen West.
We are at a crossroads in American history where without proper leadership, you are not going to have this country the way we knew it.
The difference between Patrick Murphy and Allen West is night and day.
Allen is the real deal. When he tells you something, you could take it to the bank.
I believe Patrick Murphy is running a negative campaign because he has nothing else to offer.
Murphy has no ideas, no experience. A guy like Murphy is just going to get up there and start slinging mud.
Here's a man who never put on the uniform, and he's telling Allen West that he's a coward. He doesn't belong in the same room as Allen West.
Allen West has been in war, in actual combat.
When you have a leader like Allen West, he points the way, and if you follow him, you're not going to go wrong, ever.
He's a man that you know that you can depend on.
If you want somebody to lead a country as great as ours, you need an Allen West.
I'm Allen West, and I approve this message.
Allen West, a military vet, of course. Now, let's take a look at an ad that was run in response by the Democrats.
Allen West talks a lot about his military service.
But in Washington, he hasn't served us. West voted against protecting troops fighting overseas from foreclosures. Against $28 million in medical research for wounded warriors like me.
Against suicide prevention and counseling for combat vets.
West even voted against the ban on baggage fees for troops heading into combat zones.
It's just not right.
Allen West left us behind.
Wheeling out veterans, or at least presumed veterans, and I only say presumed because I haven't vetted everybody who's in the ad, but wheeling out the veteran vote and the patriotic vote on both sides of the campaign. Talk about that. Analyze both these ads.
Powerful. You know, it's nothing like a veteran to appeal to patriotism, to duty, to service, which is what everyone wants to see in members of Congress. These are both extremely powerful ads. You even had the obvious visual right there overt in front of you with all these gentlemen wearing hats with the different branches of our service academies.
And we're assuming they are our vets.
One would assume.
We don't know. But the point, the theme of it is veterans for Allen West, veterans for Patrick Murphy.
Which is very powerful. And of course, it's also powerful today because we're in war. Troops, American men and women, are deployed in Afghanistan and serving all around the world. So it's very powerful. What I'm struck by that is this. Typically, the super PAC ads are the really negative ones, and the candidates at least try to do some glossies. I was born in a log cabin. I was born and raised here. I know my neighbors. But in the West Murphy campaign, their own ads are as bad as, if not worse than, the super PAC ads, which is quite alarming. And both these men, especially Allen West, are raising so much money that they're inundating the Treasure Coast, this whole entire region, with these ads. It's hard to turn on the television and not see these ads.
District 18, one of the toughest, most combative races in the country.
And one of the most expensive races. Now.
Final thought, former President Clinton is scheduled to be with President Obama in Orlando Monday as they make one final push for Florida, which is up for grabs now between the president and Mitt Romney. Talk about that and the final week of campaigning. Well,
if you didn't know Florida was the most important state in the country, you do now, because not only the candidates here every few days, but they're surrogates, from Madeleine Albright to Bill Clinton to actors and astronauts and athletes. Everybody's been coming to Florida because our state is so important. At the final analysis, with a week to go, no one's focusing on those undecided voters.
Turnout.
Turnout, that's it. It's turnout. Whichever campaign gets the boots on the ground, gets people to the polls, they will win. There's no better way to turn out than pressing the flesh, making the appeal in person. That's why these folks are canvassing the state. The vice president, the first lady, the surrogates, the presidential candidates themselves.
And Romney here the other day, Mitt Romney in and out of Florida.
All here. And the one good uptick to this, I think it's probably helping our economy. There's so many folks flying into the state, renting cars and driving around the state.
Be a lot quieter after the 6. Back with the Watson wrap-up in just a moment. Let's end with our Watson wrap-up.
This past week, we lost Senator George McGovern, one of the greats, lost to Nixon in 1972 in that presidential race. One of the high points of my career. Got a chance to work with the senator for 12 years and serve on his board. What always attracted me to the senator was this: no person on this earth has probably fed more people than George McGovern. Whether it's running Kennedy's Food for Peace, flying extra missions after the war, he was a decorated veteran, to provide food relief, or for 50 years serving the UN and serving the Congress to send food all around the world. He's a great American, irrespective of one's political viewpoints.
Robert Watson, thank you for those thoughts, and thank you again for all the great work at Lynn University.
It's always a pleasure,
from the president on down to every student did on the presidential debate.
The whole campus teamed up on this one, yeah.
Just wonderful, and we'll have you back next week as we lead into the final days of election. And as always, thank you for taking time to be with us on To The Point. If you'd like to send us a comment about today's broadcast, go to WPTV.com. Click on our political link. On behalf of all of us at News Channel 5, thank you so much. We wish you and yours a great day.